Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Mad Max series with Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Now, Beyond Thunderdome came out in 1985, and this is the third film in the Mad Max series, and for the longest time this was actually the final film in the Mad Max series until Mad Max Fury Road came out 20 years later. Now, Beyond Thunderdome is written by George Miller and Terry Hayes, and it's directed by George Miller and George Ogilvie. Now, George Miller, of course, co-wrote and directed the first two Mad Max movies. Now, the first Mad Max movie was definitely an independent film. I think The Road Warrior was also an independent film as well, even though that one had a much bigger budget than the first movie, but this was actually a big studio production, and I heard that the reason George Miller only co-directed this movie was because he wasn't used to working within a studio system. At least that's what I heard. Like, I heard that the reason George Miller only co-directed this movie was because he felt like he wasn't up for the job of taking on a production this big by himself. But also, shortly before they started filming this movie, Miller's friend Brian Kennedy, who actually produced the first two Mad Max movies, was killed tragically in a helicopter accident while they were location scouting for this movie. So I guess with the death of his friend, I guess that's part of the reason why Miller felt like he wasn't up for taking on a production this big by himself. Now, I heard that originally this movie wasn't even going to be a Mad Max movie. Originally, this was just going to be a Lord of the Flies type movie set in a post-apocalyptic future, but then George Miller got the idea to put the Max Rokitansky character in this movie. Now, I'm not gonna lie, you can kinda tell that this was originally going to be a different movie, and you could also kinda tell that this movie was directed by two directors. And I have to say that this is probably my least favorite Mad Max movie. Like, there are some things I do really like about this movie, but overall, in terms of all four films, I would say this is definitely my least favorite film in the series. Now, what I do like about this film is, I think for the most part, it's a pretty well-acted movie, with the exception of a lot of the child actors who are in this movie, but I'll get to that in a little bit, but I think Mel Gibson does do a really good job, once again, as the Max Rokitansky character. And Tina Turner is actually in this movie, and she plays the main villain of the movie, Anti-Entity, and she actually does do a really good job in this movie. Now, sometimes it is hit or miss when a musician tries also being an actor, but in her case, though, she did do a really good job as the main villain of this movie. But a lot of the child actors in this movie are really annoying. I did like the actress who played the character of Savannah, who was the leader of this group of children. I actually thought she did a really good job. You'll have to forgive me, I don't know off the top of my head what the actress's name was, but she did do a really good job. Now, the plot of Beyond Thunderdome is it's set years and years after the events of The Road Warrior. Now, in the first movie, Mad Max, you saw the beginning of the breakdown of society. In The Road Warrior, society officially collapsed, and it was implied in The Road Warrior that between the events of Mad Max and The Road Warrior, there may have actually have been a nuclear war, but that was only implied in The Road Warrior. In this movie, it's made pretty obvious that it was a nuclear nuclear war. But basically, in this movie, it follows the character of Max Rocketensky from the first two movies, who comes to this town called Bartertown, and there he meets the corrupt ruler of this town, Anti-Entity. Well, she's kind of the ruler, but all the town's energy is controlled by this guy who calls himself Master Blaster, who's actually two characters, but you'll understand if you see the movie, and she actually tells Max to kill Master Blaster, or kill Blaster, but keep Master. Once again, you'll understand if you see the movie, and eventually it leads to Max getting into a battle with this character Blaster in this thing called Thunderdome, but then he fails to do what Anti-Entity told him to do, so he ends up getting exiled from Bartertown. And after getting exiled from Bartertown, Max ends up running into this group of children who are kind of like a cross between the Lost Boys from Peter Pan and the characters from Lord of the Flies. And it turns out that these children actually have kind of like a cult, and they have their own religion, and they worship this man who they call Captain Walker, who apparently was the pilot of this plane that crashed, right when the bombs were dropped, and these children, they worship this man who may or may not have existed, called Captain Walker, and when Max ends up coming into this group, they think he is Captain Walker, and basically in the movie, Max ends up becoming the savior for this group of children. Now, I do have very mixed feelings on this movie, because all the stuff in Bartertown in the beginning of the movie, and then all the stuff with Max becoming the savior of this group of children, really feel like two different movies. Like, it feels like you just dropped the character of Max Rocketensky out of a real Mad Max movie into a completely different film. And I also have mixed feelings about this whole cult of children that Max meets, because on one level I like it because it kind of shows the loss of innocence that happened because of the nuclear war, but at the same time though, a lot of the actors who play these children, all the child actors, are freaking terrible and are annoying as fuck. With the exception of the actress who played Savannah. Another problem I have with this movie is in the movie there's this character called Iron Bar who is one of Anti-Entity's henchmen, and he was kinda cool in the beginning, but at the end of this movie there are so many moments where realistically this character should have died, but he's somehow still alive after moments where he should have died, and if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, at the end of this movie, it almost becomes like a live-action cartoon with this character, Iron Bar, who, once again, there are moments where he should have died, like, realistically he should have died, and he didn't. And the movie, by the end of it, almost becomes kind of a kid's movie in a way. Like, at the end where the children start helping Max, it really becomes almost like a kid's movie that just happens to feature the character of Max. So, overall, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is kind of a mixed bag for me. Like, I would say, overall, I don't think it's a terribly bad movie, but I would say it's definitely the weakest in the Mad Max series. Like, there are some things I do really like about this movie, like, I do like some of the acting in the movie, and I also like a lot of the themes that this movie touches on. Like, one of the main themes of this movie is kind of the loss of innocence that happens because of war, and also this movie came out in the 80s, which was when the Cold War was still going on, so fears of nuclear war were very real fears back in the 80s, and this movie is definitely playing on people's fears of nuclear war. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is in The Road Warrior, you had the character of the Gyro Captain, played by Bruce Spence. Now, Bruce Spence is also in this movie, but it does not appear that he's actually playing the same character, though. Now, one thing that is interesting about this is if you watch the first 3 Mad Max movies in a row, they do actually create kind of an interesting character arc for the character of Max, because the first movie was about Max losing his humanity, and The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome are about Max regaining his humanity. So overall, I have mixed feelings on this movie. It's certainly not a bad movie, but it's definitely the weakest in the Mad Max series, so unless you're a completionist, I say just skip this one and go straight to Fury Road. So yeah, that's my review on Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and bye.